Welcome back to the Growing Band Director Podcast. This is episode number 167. We're talking about jazz piano here. I'm here with resident jazz piano expert, Jake Sturtevant. How you doing?
Doing great.
Good. So we actually just did this whole recording and we decided we didn't do an intro, so we should probably do an intro.
Good idea.
So what are we going to cover in this jazz piano session?
Yeah, so a lot of this is probably just basic piano voicings, as well as approaches to comping in a big band setting.
Yeah, and these are really simple. Like for people who don't play piano, if people listen to this episode and follow the stuff that you're saying, ask for help if they don't understand it, but like with as little as 2 notes at a time, your kids can sound like a pro player and not playing everything that's on the chart.
For sure, yeah. If they have just a general understanding of how do you learn this concept so that you yourself can play it, and then of course trying to transfer that knowledge to your students is essential.
Here's a teaser. You only need to play the 3rd and the 7th.
That's it. You got 2 notes. That's it.
All right, jazz piano.
Yeah, let's do it.
Man, and this is not a shade against writers at all, but okay, so you have to interpret every chart.
Yep.
What works for the band in the chart, not what's written on the paper.
Right.
Now, I think publishers have really good heart and they're trying to do what's right.
Mm-hmm.
But have you ever actually read a chart that's written for a school band and actually played everything that's on it?
Never.
Or if you do, it's very rare.
Yeah, very, very rare. And a lot of it really is not even about whether it was written intentionally for whatever the part is so that we can hear it as far as the mix, right? A lot of the times is when we get to a comping section, section, does it actually make sense to play everything that's written there when the soloist is not doing a whole lot, right? Mm-hmm. It makes sense that there's going to be a lot of these moments where you just have to leave out a bunch of what may have been written in there, and then go through the process of using your ears rather than using what's on the page for you.
So we'll start with interpreting the chart. So you see the chart, first of all, like if you're doubling everything, because sometimes you just see the band part, and you have like a 3 or 4 part voicing of all the trumpet parts and all the saxophone parts. You're like, why am I playing this? They're already playing it.
Yeah.
So just leave that out.
Yep.
Like Count Basie wouldn't play that, right?
Exactly. Yeah. There's so many moments in a chart that it might be in your part, but if it's being covered someplace else and you don't have to necessarily double it because of the moment that it's happening, then it makes more sense to just simplify it and do something that's going to work as more of a comping instrument.
And a lot of times we talked about this, if you have a younger player who's not super competent, just take their part like weeks ahead of time before you ever work on it and just rewrite the whole thing.
Yeah.
Something you know that they're going to be able to play.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the big thing is guide tones.
Yeah.
Right. So for somebody's never heard that, what are guide tones?
Yeah. So when you're thinking about guide tones, you're really just thinking about how do I take whatever the chord is that's happening here and figure out what are the most essential components. Usually it's going to be the 3rd and the 7th that you're working with. And then sometimes you'll be throwing the root down there in your left hand for the bass note too. But a lot of it is just start with very simple 3-note voicings for your chords, and then start to move that up there for how do I expand this 3-note chord to make a little bit more my sound a little bit different.
So can you jump over the piano for a second?
Yeah, for sure.
So I'm just going to walk people through this because you won't be able to talk while you're over there. But we didn't think that part through. We need like a lapel mic or something. Okay, so if you're saying, say we're playing B flat 7, can you just play D and A flat?
Yeah, so you're just your D and A flat, which is the 3rd and 7th.
Yeah, was that D and A?
D and A.
Oh, D and A. Okay, cool. Can you make a D and A flat? Right. And you don't have to play the left hand if you have a bass player, a lot of times, right? And then when you go to the 4 chord, it doesn't jump up a 4th. Exactly. You can just go down. Instead of moving up to the 3 and 7 up here, G and the B flat, just goes down. I'm reiterating because they can't really hear you. But so you're going to just go down a half step. So the 7th becomes the 3rd, and the 3rd becomes the 7th. And then you go back up to the 1 chord, and then when you go to the 5 chord, it just goes up a half step. And then goes back, right? So you don't have to move any more than a half step to do any of that with the blues. And then, so when you hear a shell voicing, that usually means you're also now adding the 9th.
Yeah, so usually you're just adding
Yep.
Instead of doing just your third and seventh, now you put the ninth.
So now we're playing 3, 7, and 9. And then, so say when it goes to the 4 chord, you're going to move those down a half step, but you're going to keep the top note on the top. And that ninth now becomes the 13th. People who don't like music theory, their heads are spinning right now. But it makes you sound amazing. You're just keeping the C on the top, right? And then when you go to the 5 chord, you can keep the C, but you can also put it up to a D. Yep. Yep. And when you add that note, the ninth, it turns into the 13th or the ninth or whatever. So it's what we call the color note. Yeah. So that makes it that sounds awesome. So now what happens if you just double it in left hand and right hand and you get a thicker voicing? Yep. So right now you're playing the Charleston rhythm, which works great. Yep. And if you keep going, you'll find that if you just do left hand and then you solo in the right hand. So a lot of times I'll have kids do just left hand so they get used to that soloing in the right hand at the same time.
So then they have the opportunity to be able to compliment themselves at the same time as.
So can you do that a little bit where the right hand is soloing, the left hand is like having a conversation with the right hand? Okay, so now when they can do that, we're going to do a two-hand voicing that is called the miracle voicing. At least that's what I called it. The great writer Frank Mantic, who died too young, liked this as a saxophone voicing as well. So again, in the left hand, it's going to stay the same. We're going to do the D and the A flat. And then the right hand is going to take the C. We're going to move up in fourth, so you play the F, and then the root, which is B flat on the top. So together, you get more of a colorful, powerful, more powerful sound, dense sound. But what's really cool is when you move the left hand, you haven't moved the right hand at all, and you're playing. I'm not looking at the keyboard, so this is hard. The ninth and the 13th, right? So you sound like this amazing piano player, and you haven't even moved your right hand. C, F, B flat. And then if you can get them to go up a step on the F chord, so it's like D, G, C, right? I mean, these are really advanced sounding chords, and they're super simple.
When I started learning about these upper structured triad sort of things, then what you're doing is you're seeing visually a very simple chord that then becomes more complex. So for instance, on a B flat 7, sharp 11 chord, right? Instead of thinking about what are all those notes in there, now I have a go-to voicing where I'm going to play my third and seventh in my left hand. But then instead of thinking about all the other stuff with the theory stuff, I just go up a whole step from the root and play a triad.
Yep.
So I play a C major triad with my right hand, and now I'm playing a really nice sounding B flat 7 sharp 11.
So if it,
voicing.
when can you, and we're going to hear what that sounds like in a second,
Yeah.
but what, if it doesn't say sharp 11,
Mm-hmm.
do you ever use it as long as the bass player's on the same page, or can use it whenever you want, or guitar player? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I typically will not suggest to use those sorts of voicings unless the tune is calling for it, right? It does very often. You're not going to want to add a lot of those extensions. 13s are fine, but adding sharp 11s, flat 13s, those sorts of things, without kind of knowing what else is happening harmonically and melodically, doesn't make a lot of sense to do that. It's going to sound cool sometimes, and then other times it's not going to work.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. But having some go-tos for that sort of thing, and like another one that I go to is anytime I see a flat 9 chord, I'm basically thinking, so if I'm thinking F7 flat 9, right? I think about doing a D chord triad, D chord triad with the third and the seventh in the bass. Now I have a flat 9 voicing because you have the D's your 13, the F sharp is your flat 9, right? And then your A is your third.
Yep.
So now you already have your extension put in there, and all I'm thinking, oh, I just need to do a D triad
Yep.
with an F7, and it's so much easier to be able to do that sort of approach rather than figuring out some fancy voicing.
Okay, can you
Yeah,
play
yeah.
those and we'll go through them. So let's do that one you just did. So we're thinking F7. Can you play the F for us? Yep. So then you have your third and your seventh in the left hand, the A and the E flat. Are you playing A, E flat, or E flat A?
I'm playing A, E flat.
A and then E flat. Okay.
And then I'm gonna do.
And you're gonna do a D major chord in the right hand.
Chord, and I'll put it in root position way up high.
So you have an octave away.
Take my A down an octave, so I'm doing an inversion.
Yep. But you're just thinking F7 and you're thinking D major in the top,
I'm just thinking about my D major triad.
which is the sixth. So if you just play the third and the seventh and add the major triad of the sixth, that gives you that sound.
Yeah, yeah. And you can
That's
do
cool.
that with really any chord that you're thinking about, right? I'm thinking now I'm on C7 chord. I know where my third and seventh is. Now I think about my sixth note of the
A major.
scale, A major, and I put my major triad in there.
Yep. So all you're doing is basically adding a flat nine.
Yep. But I'm thinking.
Yep.
I'm not even thinking flat nine. I'm just thinking. I know that voicing works.
Yep.
With having my major triad.
He knows that voicing works, having the major triad on the top. Now let's do it with the sharp 11.
Yes.
So
Here's your
third and seventh in the left hand. Yep.
And then I do a C major triad.
C major triad. It's such a contemporary sound, but all you're doing is playing a whole step above with the major triad.
Yeah. And just practicing having that as a go-to voicing, and then you can just use that by just going up half steps, right? Then you're just already just seeing where it is, and it becomes muscle.
Can you come back and explain that part?
Yeah.
That was too much to translate.
So trying to when you practice these sorts of things to get the concept down, just getting that voicing and then moving it around in half steps is a great way of doing it. So then it becomes muscle memory, and you can already see the shapes visually when you're doing that as well.
Okay, so 2-5-1s.
Yep.
For people who are like, what the heck is that? I mean, anytime you see, at least in my eyes, if you see a minor chord followed by a dominant chord, followed usually by a major, not always, that's just a 2-5-1 all in one key. So improvisation wise, if you see D minor to G to C major,
Yep.
that's 4 measures of just C major improvisation wise. So
Exactly.
that's a way to kind of simplify that.
Yep.
But then also on the piano, we wouldn't play root position D minor, root position G, root position C. I mean, maybe when a kid first learns to like get an idea about what the chord is.
Yeah.
But we would start on the third and seventh.
Yep.
Right. So you'd start on F and C.
Yep.
Where would you go from there?
Yeah, so basically it's just a pattern. That's the great thing about 2-5-1s is once you understand this pattern, it's transferable to any key that you're in.
And it's easy.
And it's easy, right? So, and you can start, if in that case, when you put the F and the C on the top, all that's happening is when you go to the 5 chord, you take your top note and you come down a half step.
So you keep
So
the
now
F.
you're on an F and a B. And then when you go to your 1 chord, the C major 7, your bottom finger will now come down a half step. So now you're on an E. So it's E and B. And that's just a pattern that's going to happen where you come down a half step with the top note, down a half step with the bottom note, and that becomes your 2-5-1 voicing that you can do in all keys.
Yeah, and you can even just keep circling around the circle of, I'll call it fourths, even though people call it fifths.
Yeah.
That way, and you just work your way down the keyboard.
Exactly.
Can you demonstrate that for
Yeah,
us?
for sure. Let me go do it.
And I'll try to talk through this one. So we're going to start on C major 7. So if C is in the bass, and then you have an E and a B. So if you play it together, notice it sounds like a full C major 7. Okay, and then we'll go to F7. Sorry, no, sorry. Sorry. D minor 7. F and C. Yep. D's in the bass, and then we go to G7. Yep, you just moved one note in the right hand.
Yeah, and then the left hand will go down to your root note, and then C major 7, so your bottom one will come down. So the pattern is just you start with your F and C, down a half step for the top note, down a half step for the bottom note.
Yep. And you can do that with the bass note in the left hand. Sound like that. And then you can also do it with it in the left hand without, like if you have a bass player, you can do it without, and that frees you up. So if you're soloing, right, you can solo over that too. And the cool part too is if you think of it all as C major, like say a kid's brand new at this, they can play that little pattern, but they're just going to solo over their C major scale, right? That's like a good intro way to do it. I love the hacks, the cheats, like the initial things to get kids doing it. Not that it's always that simple, but it's a good place to start.
Well, and it's probably also
Wait till you come back before you talk.
yeah.
Okay.
It's also a really good thing to be able to do to use that as a vehicle for transferable knowledge, right? So then you say to your students, oh, okay, now whenever you see a minor seventh to a dominant seventh chord to a major seven chord, now you're starting to recognize that 2-5-1 pattern, and then you can rely a little bit more on your muscle memory to be able to help guide you through what that pattern is going to sound like. And usually what I do for students is I try to teach the concept so that then they can practice that concept. And a great way of being able to do it, like you were talking about earlier, is circle of fourths, right? Because you're just coming down. I'll have to go demonstrate this. You're coming down another half step to get into your next key and doing the whole pattern over and over again that way. And that's a great way of being able to just see it visually on the keyboard and then go through the practice of being able to recognize what the chord is.
I'm in a position a lot of having a kid in a big band who has to do this, but I don't have them in a lesson. I don't have them in an improv class.
Yep.
So I'll physically write this out instead of their other part.
Yep, exactly.
And then they'll get rests when they're not supposed to play, so they're just playing what's essential.
Yep.
And I'll write out like just in the left hand, and then I'll say double hands if needed or if you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, it takes time.
Yeah, it definitely does when you have to rewrite your parts, right? And if that is working for you, I would say great. That's a wonderful way of doing it. For me, typically, what I'll do is I'll say, "Hey, look, can you come in for 10 minutes, right? Or come 10 minutes early to rehearsal, and I'm going to teach you this thing." And that way, they get a chance to learn the skill to be able to start.
Well, and so often, if you're playing with a chart on charts that are not super simple, they're not just 2-5-1 with no, you know what I mean? There's like more stuff in there than that too. One thing I found myself doing this year, because I had a great vibes player too. So, and all the voicings were it was the strutting with some barbecue sauce.
Oh yeah,
some barbecue sauce. Strutting with some barbecue.
The
Louis Armstrong tune. I took, I think they were all 5-note voicings.
Yeah.
And I had 2 players who were comfortable but not super experienced. So the piano player had the bottom 3 notes, and the vibes player had the top 3 notes with like one of each. So we kind of had the whole that worked for us. But the changes were really complicated. So they had to kind of just learn those changes. It wasn't really as much of a concept.
Yeah, and that it really is going to be kind of tune dependent a lot of the times, right? If you want to teach the concept, you should actually find a tune that's going to work for teaching the concept.
That's a whole thing, because soloing too, like don't do giant steps if your kids can't solo on. Like choose the tunes based on what they can improvise on. So that when you get to there, I mean, we've also heard bands play. Maybe you haven't. A band play this tune, Satin Doll, which is always in C. And they sound great, and they get to the solo section. And the horns are playing in B flat.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Like, it's almost about the tune first, the melody first, and the chord changes first.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the times with my big band, I make sure that they have the opportunity to learn it with the lead sheet, so that they have the chord changes in front of them, and then they have the melody in front of them as well. And I'll do the extra work to write out the lead sheet and transpose it for them if there's not a lead sheet available. So I think it's really an important component that they go through the process of learning the tune, right?
It just takes planning. Like, you can't do it the morning of. You have to kind of go, okay, next week we're going to do this. I need to have this ready. Let's spend some prep time on that.
Yeah. The other thing that it's great for, I know we're kind of getting off subject for the piano voicings too, but the other thing it's great for is form, right? We're working on a tune right now in jazz band where the Stomping at the Savoy. And we went through the process of just learning the head for the tune for at least chords this last rehearsal. And I said, all right, so now that you guys know the form of the tune, right, the AABA, let's listen to the chart again, and you tell me what section we're on for each of the rehearsal marks. And that just allows for so much more understanding for where we are in the tune when we're going through it. And then getting them all improvising on it, even if they don't have changes in their part. Now they have a lead sheet, and now I say, all right, you're all going to jump in and do some soloing.
And if you're Measure 81, you can say, all right, let's go back to the bridge.
yeah, let's go back
they
to the
should
B
know that.
section. They know right where it is.
So I assume you know this, but I don't want me to put you on the spot. Do you know the famous Harry Connick recording of Stomp on the Savoy?
Is this the one that he goes to 5/4 to get the audience to clap on the right?
No, no.
beats? Oh, okay.
No,
This
it's
is a different
from.
one.
So there's a movie from the '80s with Billy Crystal.
Oh yes, I do.
When Harry Met Sally,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
that
yeah.
whole album is like his music and it's all jazz.
Yeah, yeah,
And he
yeah.
has a version of Stomp on the Savoy that,
Yeah.
if I could play the piano at a professional level, that's what I want to
Yeah,
sound like.
yeah. No, he's great. He's a
it's so
really good
good.
player. No, the one that I was talking about is forget the tune that he was at. He was playing a live performance, and the audience started clapping on 1 and 3.
I think it's his "Come by Me" tune. I
yeah,
think
that's
what he
probably
did.
the one. Yeah, and he ends up throwing a measure of 5 in there, so
Yep.
they're back on in 2 and 4. And I thought that was
It's called
brilliant.
the 5/4 trick. I think
Yeah.
on YouTube.
Yeah, it's brilliant, brilliant.
So what's next? Okay, so would you agree with this statement? In the big band, while the horns are playing, the piano should take a less active role, and during the solo section, they should take a more active role.
Yeah. So a lot of it is going to be dependent on what's happened in the context of the solo, right? And also whether or not you have multiple rhythm instruments. So if I have a guitarist and a piano player, we want to talk about who's comping and what sort of role you're going to play in the midst of that solo section. Yeah, for sure, you want to make sure that depending on the tune, so in the Portland Jazz Orchestra very often, I'll have chord changes written in for everything, right? But most of the time, a lot of the time, I'm listening to what's happening in the ensemble, and there's going to be a lot of times where I'm not playing. Even if I have chord changes written in there, I'm not playing because I know that the style calls for that or doesn't call for that. So I try to teach my students the same sort of thing is you might have voicings written out, you might have rhythms written out during this part, but this is really about the saxes doing their sax solo thing right now. And you don't want to be taking over the show when it's about the sax solo. So it's time to kind of back off and say, maybe I don't play all the changes that are in here. I don't play all the things that are written, but then I get to the solo section and I'm the only comping instrument and I need to make sure that I'm outlining these chords for the soloist to be able to hear and the audience to be able to hear. And that's a different role.
And you're bringing some rhythmic excitement to that, having a conversation with the soloist.
Yeah.
So a couple questions. One would be, how do you get, if so you're saying guitar solo is going to comp here, piano is going to comp here. What are some ways you can get them to play at the same time and not be jumbled?
Yeah, so a lot of it is listening, right? So am I, as a piano player, feeling like I'm playing the same thing as the guitar player? Is my role basically doubling the guitar player? I'm asking those questions when I'm comping. So if it is the case that I end up playing very similar things than the guitar, and the guitar might be not just doing Freddie Green quarter notes the whole time, then I want to make sure that we're complementing each other in some way. So I want to make sure that I'm not stepping on toes of the guitarist, but we're not also taking away from what the soloist is doing.
So a couple things that come to my mind is, one, that Freddie Green. If they're doing Freddie Green, then you're free to kind of do whatever. But if they're comping on their own, then maybe you play more of like a high note piano, whole notes kind of thing, or a little melodic.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times I tell my, and it depends on the chart a lot of the times, but I'll say, it's okay to just plunk an octave here. Ding. And you sound great, right? That's bassy thing, right? Do that sort of thing, and you're going to have an opportunity to be involved and not feel like you're just sitting on your hands the whole time. And you're going to sound like you're not getting in people's way, too.
The easiest way to ruin a jazz band is with amplifiers.
Yep.
Because they can sound killer. Just turn that knob up too much, and it ruins all of it.
Yep.
So what about amp placement? Like being able to hear stuff, where do you put the, assuming, you have some control over the piano volume, guitar volume, things like that.
Yeah. So a lot of the times I'll make sure if I'm using a keyboard, the speaker will be placed right behind the performer, whoever's performing it, and not in front of them at all. That's really important that they can hear themselves. That's the reason that they have that amplifier. And then you want to think about the directionality of where that's going. If that's for your primary way of the audience being able to hear that performer, then you want to make sure that it's angled towards the audience as well. But the primary component of what you're doing is to set it up so that the performer can hear themselves.
I was always taught, imagine the sound comes out like an ice cream cone, and then you're like 3 to 4 feet in front of that, because if you're too close, you might block the sound
Oh, sure.
too, right?
Yeah. You don't want to be too close, for sure, because if you're doing that, you're going to be muffling the sound in some capacity. Yeah. And I like to put my speaker up on a stand so that it's elevated. When I'm performing, I don't want it down my butt because I'm not going to be able to hear myself, right?
Right.
It's pointing up, and I don't have ears down there, so I'm not going to be able to hear myself.
Yep.
So a lot of it is just making sure that it's up high enough to be able to be heard by whoever's performing.
Love it.
Yeah.
So we haven't talked about the Mark Levine stuff. So did he just pass away, or am I thinking of a different person?
That's a great question. I don't know, and I should know.
I feel really bad.
So do I.
Okay.
So do I.
Well,
Thanks
if
for
he
making me
didn't,
feel
I'm really
bad.
sorry, Mark. But if he did, then okay.
Yeah. So Mark Levine's piano book is the way that I learned this stuff, right? And the great thing about
What's it called?
It's called the Jazz Piano Book.
Okay.
That's it. Nice and simple. And I know that there's a ton of pedagogy out there. There's a ton of other options for people, but I use this one the most, mostly probably because I'm the one, that's how I learned it, right? But a lot of it is it's very compact and boiled down to the essential components. The thing that I almost always have as a go-to for my students is to be able to do the 3-note voicings, which is what we just covered earlier. Left hand root, and then you do your 3rd and 7th, and then take it down a half step, and so on and so forth for each one of those. But then going through the circle of fifths as you're practicing it as well. And I don't know if I've done that yet. But a lot of that is once you have those voicings, put it into practice in a tune, right? And go through the process of playing along with recordings, because a lot of it is once you have the notes, it's about style. It's about rhythms and style. And you talked about the Charleston. That's one example, right? But if I'm playing a bossa nova, I can do the same exact chord voicings, but it's going to be rhythmically different. So it's really a matter of how do I take this and put it into a practical setting and play along with a recording that makes sense.
Can I tell you about an exercise that I've used?
Yeah.
For rhythms,
Yeah.
for guitar, piano. It works with left hand snare drum on drum set. I got it from the old school drumline mentality, like drum corps.
Yeah.
Like, not that I was in it, but I've taught with some great teachers who have used it.
Yeah.
And their name for it is a little intense. It's called count or die. So it's not that important, but you can do it with a metronome. The real way to do it is without a metronome.
Yeah.
But so you just imagine a 4/4 measure that repeats, and you play 1/8 note per measure. But every measure it moves back an eighth note. So you play 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 3, 4, 1 and 2, 3. We'll finish 4, 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3 and 1, 2, 3 and 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4 and 1. Or and you can cycle it.
Yeah.
Because so many kids get into the always playing on beat one. So getting them to play off the beat works really well.
Yeah.
So
no,
I've
that's
used that.
great. No, I love that. And just having some way of being able to have a few different patterns for kids to go to that I've used similar ways where I basically say, okay, you got your Charleston 1 and, right? The and a 2, the 1 and then the and a 2. But then you go through and say, okay, now that you have that down, let's comp again. But now let's put it on just the and of 1. Right. And then you just go through the process of knowing where you are, both for chord changes, but then you're also thinking rhythmically in a new way as well.
And if they're playing on the and of 4, it should be the chord of the following measure,
Exactly.
not because
You're
the end of 4 is really
anticipating.
the new beat one.
You're anticipating the next chord change when you're doing that. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Anything we missed?
Yeah. No, that sounds great. Do you want me to demonstrate any of those things?
Sure, but I'd love to get you a mic so you can speak while you do it. Hold on, let's pause.
You ready?
Okay, so what are we demonstrating?
All right. So I'm going to try to do this 2-5-1 voicing, but also do it in the circle fifths so that we have that pattern, right? So if I'm doing that D minor 7 with the F and the C, I go to my G7 and then my C major 7. Now if I just take that C major 7, the E and the B, and I come down a half step,
C minor.
now
7.
I'm on C minor 7. So now I'm doing the whole thing down a step. So I'm doing C minor 7, F7, B flat major 7. and then I take that again down a half step, and I'm doing the circle of fifths essentially with all of my 2-5-1 patterns. And I think it's important that the students are learning the root note on the left hand, mostly because they have to remember what is the chord that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Right. Because I can do this pattern all day. Right.
But there's no context.
But there's no
for a young kid.
context for what chord I'm on, and then if I can't apply it to whatever it comes in my way for chord changes, right? So I still need to remember what chord I'm on when I'm doing it. So D minor 7, G major G 7, C major 7. Now I'm on my C minor 7, F7, B flat major 7, so that I go through that process of knowing the chord as well as the pattern at the same time. And then once you get the pattern, you know what chord it is, then you get rid of your left hand. You don't even need to do it.
Yep.
You're cool.
Yeah, and then you can transfer that to your left hand, your left hand. So then you're soloing in your right hand, or you can double it or whatever. And if there's somebody listening, still listening, hasn't shut it off yet, that's good for them. But if they're still listening and they like stuff isn't clicking, obviously they can reach out to me or you. But
sure,
also if they have a piano player friend, just be like, hey, what do they mean by this? Because sitting and doing it is like, there was one year where I said, okay, this summer I'm sitting at my piano and I'm learning all this jazz piano stuff. It was like 2004 or whatever it was. But then I went back and like, I can sit and show a kid and I can function on it.
Yeah. Well, and not only that is I would suggest, it's easier for me to say because I grew up with piano, so it's easier for me, right? But I think it's the same thing as you're just trying to put yourself in the shoes of whoever the kid is that's going to be playing it, right? And you just say, can I comp over this, right? If I'm not a piano player, can I comp using 3-note voicings with the recording? And then you go through the process of learning it yourself enough that you'd be able to teach it to your student as well. And it should be simple enough that even though it might take a little bit while at first for your first tune, the concept's going to register.
I feel like almost the hardest thing to do with this is when you have a kid who gets a ton of chops. So musically, they're pretty mature, but they're not ready to take a backseat to anybody yet, and they want to overplay all the time.
Yeah. So then you talk a little bit about the context that you're in, right? And I have this pretty often with piano players that are quite good and they know what they're doing, right? But then you got to be like, I know that you got the chops to be able to do that, but actually in a context like this, let's listen to Basie, right? Basie's got chops and he's not playing barely at all. Same thing with Ellington, right? There's going to be a lot of context where you might have chops and you got to not play.
And then sometimes, I'm putting you on the spot here, but what if your piano player is your best player in the entire band? What are some charts we want to do, right? So, I mean, obviously we could sit and talk about that for hours, but I wanted to, what comes to your head right away?
Yeah, so probably a lot of things for me would be anything that's going to allow for some featured time for your piano player. Some Ellington charts are always going to have some opportunity, although there's a lot of time that you're not playing when you're doing Ellington stuff too. We just did Thad Jones tune this past year, and I'm in a blank on what the tune was, but Thad also has some charts that are going to have some piano feature sort of stuff with it. Anything that has some flexibility to be able to allow some space either out front for the piano player to be able to do their thing, or in the midst of the tune as kind of a featured solo.
2 suggestions. One is Matt Harris's Prayer Meeting, which is like it's a Kendora chart. It's like a grade 2, 2.5-ish. It's like young high school, better middle school. But it's kind of like a gospel thing and has a lot of piano. And then another one is an extreme case. This is not a chart, but we did it once because we had a 8th grade girl who was a piano player, and she could play Chopin, and she was doing all these mazurkas and everything. But the rest of the band, I hope nobody's listening from that band, they couldn't play anything. It was like a grade half band with this amazing piano player. So there's this, I don't know if you know the Oscar Peterson, A Child is Born.
Oh, yes.
But like there's a video of all of the. So I literally took that frame by frame and wrote it out for this girl.
Nice.
And then literally, like, it was whole notes on the loud parts, and then maybe the saxophone's got the melody once. It was like this quote-unquote arrangement I did, but it was basically just like putting her in that position.
Feature role for the
So it's
piano.
hard because so many times for a piano player, you are going to tell them to play less because they're in a big band. But when they can really play Roland by Mary Lou Williams or something that really puts them in the spotlight.
Yeah, and even taking, and you'll find a whole bunch of arrangements out there, but taking a tune that has a featured piano part, right, like maybe a Chick Corea tune or a Herbie Hancock tune, those, and then finding a good big band arrangement of it, you already know that the piano is featured in the original of it, so that you can at least be able to kind of adapt whatever the arrangement is to have a little bit more space for the piano feature on it.
We sincerely appreciate you taking your valuable time and listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. Your students are very lucky to have a band director like you. If you have any suggestions for episode topics or think you have an area of expertise to share on a show with us, please reach out. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe as well. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks for listening to The Growing Band Director. See you next week.